Hello, welcome back to Look and Live. I haven't done a video for a while because my health has been even worse than usual, but here I am. I'm going to do one for Easter because I love Easter. But I'm not going to start with Easter, I'm going to start with DIY. So recently, I put up a shelf a little while ago in the other room, and I needed to look for these particular screws I really like, and I knew I had some, so I looked through my whole DIY cupboard. Looked through the box where the screws normally are, looked through the box where the tools normally are, couldn't find them. And then I looked in sort of the drill box in case I'd left them in there or something like that. Couldn't find them anywhere. And these screws normally come in this little square plastic box. And I was remembering in my head what it looks like. And I'd already looked through everything and I thought, well, I've got to have a look again. And this time I started taking everything out of all the boxes, taking the boxes out one by one and emptying them. I found the screws, and I knew I had them, so it wasn't a surprise to find them, but it was a surprise they weren't in that little box that I thought they came in. They used to come in that box, but now they come in a little bag. And the point of this story is a few-fold, but it's like we look for things in life. We look for God, we look for ultimate meaning, truth, we look for happiness and love. And I think it's there to be found, like those screws were there to be found. But sometimes we look straight past the answer because we have a preconceived notion of what kind of packaging it's going to come in. We look for meaning and we expect it to come in a box, but it comes in a bag. Or we look for truth, we look for love, or we look for even God himself. And we're looking for that little square box in our minds that we know, oh, it comes in that square box. I'm going to find God in this particular place. I'm going to find truth in this particular way. It will look like that. But it doesn't. It comes in the bag, not the box. And I want to talk to you about Easter. Talk about the cross of Jesus Christ. When we look at it, it's a bag. It's not a box. It's not fancy. It's not modern. It's kind of violent. It's religious. It's kind of humble. There's no reason it should be famous, really. He's a guy who got crushed by the Romans. Like, how many people does that apply to? But I want to encourage you to do what I did with my screws and to take another look. Maybe you've looked at the cross before. Maybe you looked into Jesus before and you thought, no, that's not it. But I looked through everything for my screws and I thought I couldn't find them. But I knew they were there, so I looked again. And I encourage you, look at Jesus again. I'm going to go through some of these sort of objections, these reasons we find the cross maybe offensive or maybe irrelevant, or maybe the reasons we can discount it. And just talk about them a little bit, try to push you to reconsider your preconceptions and to look at Jesus again. So my first sort of objection to the cross, like you would think this is not how truth and love and how God should be packaged. It's not modern. It offends our modern sensibilities in lots of ways. It's not in line with our modern day values of inclusivity and things like that, so that offends lots of people. I just say to you, what if God doesn't have your culture? If there really was a God, would he be exactly like you? Which is, kind of what a lot of these come down to. It's ancient, and that kind of bothers us. And they have a whole different set of ideas in their heads about how the world works and all that kind of thing. And it's written down in books, on papyri originally, and then eventually gets put into codexes, and those manuscripts become books to us. And books are kind of old-fashioned for some people, although they're still the most popular medium for communication, I think, for many subjects. It's not in an email, it's not in a video. We have to go read this book to learn about God. Of course, you can also pray to him, but to know the facts about Jesus, you have to go to the Bible, go to these old sources. And kind of ironically, the Bible is more modern and more up-to-date than anything else. We can think it's outdated, but actually, a lot of the values from the Bible are ones that underpin our world today. The idea of human rights comes basically from the idea that humans are made in the image of God. The idea of sort of that the world operates on fixed laws, the physical world that underpins physics and all of science is a purely, theistic idea in origin. The Bible actually underpins all these modern ideas, but we forget that when we come to it and look at it and say, this is a bit old and weird. It's weird, but are you willing to look at it again? And maybe the truth might be ancient. The cross is kind of violent. And you ask the Christian, why is it so violent? You say, well, he had to pay for our sins. And then that's offensive again because it's calling you a sinner. Isn't that offensive? But maybe the truth is, maybe you are a sinner. I know I am. Just think about it for 2 seconds. Do you live up to your own moral standards all the time? I don't think anyone does. And do you think God's standards are higher or lower than yours? They're going to be a lot higher than yours. So if you don't live up to your own moral standards, what are the chances you live up to God's moral standard? And then we say, well, why is it so violent though? I can understand we fall short. I can understand that maybe I'm not the best person, but here's Jesus nailed to a cross. It's horrific. But there's a lot going on there. It's also what people do to God. When God came down in human form, that's what people did to him, because that's how people feel about God. It uncovers the human heart. It shows up what was really there, the kind of level of hatred and violence. And it shows what people do to suppress the truth. They'll push it down any way they can. And they tried lots of ways to trick Jesus, to humiliate him. None of it worked. So in the end, they just tried to shut him up by killing him. And that's what they do to many prophets of truth throughout all of history. It's violent, but it's violent in an interesting way because Jesus is the one undergoing the violence. It's not the old myth of violence that you see in so many action films and so many Greek or Norse myths or wherever else, that violence can tame evil, that we can punch someone so hard we could save the world and make it good again. That's not what happens here. Actually, the hero is the one being killed, the one undergoing the violence, the victim. And that's a very revolutionary idea, that actually Jesus willingly gave himself to undergo that violence, to suffer all that humans can do to you, to be tortured, to be killed, to be mocked, to be reviled. And they did it for us. Some people say, oh, it's like human sacrifice. But it's not really, because he's choosing to do it. It's not like human sacrifice in the same way that a fireman running into a building to save a burning child is not human sacrifice. It's human sacrifice in the sense that a human sacrificed themselves to save someone. But that's the same with Jesus. It's not human sacrifice in the kind of religious sense, but it's human sacrifice in that he put himself in harm's way for us. So it's also religious. And that offends some people. Or it doesn't offend you necessarily, but it can think, oh, boring or irrelevant, or, oh, I've tried religion, it doesn't work. And Jesus is religious, and it is part of organized religion. Like there's church, church is a real thing instituted by Jesus in some ways. But Jesus has a paradoxical relationship towards religion. He challenges all the religious authorities of his day. And he certainly tells people like the Sumerians that their religion is just false, that they worship in ignorance. But he is also religious. He sets up the religion of Christianity, although it's not. If you'd have asked people at the time, like who recognize religions, like, oh, tell me about your new religion, this new sect of Judaism, what's it like? Or, who's your priest? You say, oh, Jesus is our priest. God himself is our priest. They say, oh, well, where do you go to temple? They say, oh, well, our temple is Jesus himself, and then we're included in that as his body. And like, oh, okay, and what kind of sacrifices do you do? Oh, well, Jesus himself, God was the sacrifice. It's kind of this collapsing of all religion to where all the symbols of religion are fulfilled in Jesus. So where religion has symbols, Christianity has Christ. It has the real thing. It doesn't have the shadow of the thing, the symbol of the thing, the precursor, the foreshadowing. It has the actual thing. God himself is the center of all of Christianity. It's just, pretty cool. So just challenge yourself. There's a lot of people who say, oh, I'm spiritual but not religious, or, oh, I can't trust organized religion. But just try again. That's my encouragement here. I found those screws by looking again, and by setting aside my preconceived notions. Try organized religion again. Try specifically the Church of Jesus Christ. There's lots of hypocrisy in religion, of course there is. There are lots of false prophets and false teachers. Of course there are. But you know who says that more than anyone? Jesus. Jesus is calling out false teachers and hypocrisy all the time. The Pharisees and Sadducees and other religious leaders he was around were hypocritical. They'd put lots of things in the way of knowing God, lots of extra rituals and work you had to do, when actually the God of Israel had called for them to rest on the Sabbath, and they'd made it into work. For instance, that's one example. They'd put human rules on and actually undermine what God had said. And that can happen in the church today. people put on extra rules and extra ideas, and they make it about what we do instead of what God does. But that's not what Christianity really is about. It's really about what God has done for us. And it's really about Christ, not just any symbol or anything like that that other religions are about. And the other thing, I guess the last thing I'll say about the cross, is that it's kind of small. It seems insignificant. I mean, the Romans crucified a lot of people, and political and religious leaders have killed lots of dissidents and lots of rebels and prophets and things and people like that. Like, it's not uncommon. That's kind of the pattern of history. And I would challenge you to think, how come this Jesus thing took off? He was another messianic movement around the turn of the first century. Like, there were a lot of them. If you read people like Josephus, there's a lot of messianic movements. A lot of people who claim they're the Messiah. And when they die, their brother or their cousin takes it up, or they give up and they say, oh, he wasn't the Messiah. Or they say, yeah, let's try again with his son or his brother or something like that. None of them say he was raised from the dead. None of them say, oh, he's back with us by his spirit now after he was raised from the dead and gone to heaven. No one jumps to that conclusion. It's not a normal thing to think. By all, Jesus was so remarkable in so many ways, and his life is full of so many things that if you don't believe him as God, you have to explain away with lots of coincidences. I mean, he predicted how he would die. He died on the Passover. Like, that's a pretty massive coincidence. When he died, the sun went dark for 3 hours. Like, that's a pretty massive coincidence. And this guy who claimed to be God is also the one guy, when he died, he appeared to his followers. His followers believed they'd seen him alive. Like, there's so many coincidences around Jesus. He should be forgotten. If he was just another apocalyptic prophet, another guy who challenged the religious authorities or challenged Rome in his day and was killed for it, he should be forgotten, or he should be remembered in some, other way. But something happened. And I know what happened. He was raised from the dead. But how do you explain what happened? Have another look at Jesus. Why is Jesus this amazing figure that he is in history, in sociology, in our minds, in psychology, in religion? Why is he this guy who has shaped all of human history through his own self-sacrifice? How did that work? How did that happen? Why didn't it just fizzle out in a few, after he died? Why didn't it just stop his movement? Ask yourself those questions. So, happy Holy Week. Happy Easter, and I hope you take the time to look again at the cross of Christ, which can be offensive, which might seem irrelevant, which might just seem really weird, but try again, look again, and maybe truth comes in a different package to what you expect. Maybe happiness comes in a different package to what you expect. The world says, take for yourself, that's happiness. Jesus gave his life and found fullness of joy. So, look again at the cross this Easter, and I pray God will speak to you, and God bless you guys. Thanks for tuning in.